I want you to picture this. A single sentence spoken in the White House. Total safety, total security, not for a nation, not for a people, for oil companies in Venezuela. In one moment, Donald Trump redraws the map. Maduro is gone. America's biggest oil giants are invited back in. And the price tag is staggering. $100 billion. Trump calls it opportunity. He calls it energy dominance. He calls it cheaper gas for you. It sounds bold. It sounds clean. It sounds like a reset button on history. But oil has memory. Markets remember, and Venezuela remembers too. Because behind this promise lies a harder question. Can political power really override economic reality? And when a superpower says, trust us, who is actually taking the risk? If you want to understand why this moment matters to Venezuela, to global energy, and to your wallet, stay with me. Because before the oil flows, we need to understand the problem. So what is the real issue here? It is not just Venezuela. It is not just oil. It is power meeting reality. Venezuela sits on the world's largest proven oil reserves. That fact changes rooms in Washington. It excites boardrooms in Houston. But reserves are not production. Oil underground is not oil in the market. For 20 years, Venezuela's industry has been hollowed out. Assets were nationalized. Foreign companies left. Infrastructure aged. Investment vanished. Now Trump is offering a deal. You bring the money. We provide protection. The past is erased. But oil executives know something politicians often ignore. Capital is cautious. Markets price risk. And trust cannot be declared by executive order. Even in this room of smiling CEOs, hesitation is visible. One company says it can move fast. Others say Venezuela is still uninvestable. This is the fault line between political confidence and economic mechanics. To understand why this gap exists, we need to look backward. Because today's moment was built decades ago. To understand Venezuela today, you have to rewind the clock back to the late 1990 seconds. When oil was booming and Venezuela was rising, the country rode a wave of high prices. Production surged, money flowed. For a moment, it looked unstoppable. Then politics intervened. Under Hugo Chávez, the state reasserted control. Foreign assets were nationalized. Oil companies were pushed out. Contracts were rewritten. The message was clear. The oil belonged to the people, but the system that produced it began to decay. Without outside capital, infrastructure aged, skilled workers left. Maintenance stopped. Production fell year after year. By the time Nicolás Maduro took power, the decline was structural. Sanctions made it worse. Mismanagement accelerated it. Investment dried up almost entirely. This is the inheritance Trump is now confronting. Not a sleeping giant, but a damaged machine. You cannot restart an industry by changing the driver. You must rebuild the engine. And that brings us to the first shock. The moment politics met the oil market head on, then came the first rupture. Maduro is arrested, U.S. forces move in, and suddenly Venezuela is declared open for business. Trump does not hesitate. He goes public, he goes big. Production, he says, can surge within 18 months. Oil will flood the market. Prices will fall. America will win. In the same breath, he offers something radical. Legal shields, security guarantees, an executive order protecting oil revenue from creditors. This is not subtle diplomacy. This is shock therapy. Oil executives listen carefully. Some lean forward. Chevron says it can double output immediately. Others are more careful. Exxon says the quiet part out loud. Today, Venezuela is uninvestable. That word matters because it exposes the gap between headlines and reality. Oil fields do not respond to speeches. Pipelines do not rebuild themselves. And investors do not forget nationalization. This is the first crisis moment. the illusion of speed colliding with the physics of oil. And beneath it lies a deeper mechanism, one that determines whether this gamble succeeds or collapses. Here is the mechanism most people miss. Oil investment is not about enthusiasm. It is about rules. Companies do not ask, is there oil? They ask, who controls it? Who writes the law? And will those laws survive the next election? Venezuela failed that test once already. Assets were seized, contracts were broken, billions were lost. That history does not disappear because Maduro is gone. Trump offers protection, military presence, legal orders, political backing, but oil projects last decades, administrations last years. Executives understand this imbalance. They want courts that function, regulations that endure, a commercial system that does not swing with power. This is why capital moves slowly, not out of fear, but out of memory. There is another constraint, too. The world does not need more oil right now. Supply is high. Prices are already falling. Cheap Venezuelan crude is not a necessity. So the real mechanism is trust meeting timing, and both are fragile. This sets the stage for the second shock, because when markets hesitate, pressure builds, and pressure always finds a release. And then reality pushes back, quietly, relentlessly. Global oil markets are already saturated. Tankers are full. Warehouses are crowded. Prices are drifting down. This is the second crisis, not political, economic. Trump promises abundance, but abundance already exists. More Venezuelan oil does not shock the market. It weighs on it. For companies, this changes the math. Why rush billions into broken fields when profits are thin and supply is everywhere? Every delay compounds decay. Rust spreads. Pipelines fail. Skilled labor disappears. Speed was the promise. Time becomes the enemy. And Venezuela is caught in the middle, between Washington's urgency and Wall Street's patience. This is how energy transitions stall. Not with drama, but with hesitation. The headlines fade. Meetings stretch. Investment committees pause. And while power struggles at the top, the real cost sinks lower. Down to the street, down to the worker, down to you. Because this story does not end in boardrooms. It ends in daily life. Now let's talk about you. Because geopolitics always sounds abstract until it lands in daily life. If you are Venezuelan, this is not theory. It is electricity that cuts out, water that stops running, a salary that buys less every week. You are told salvation is coming. Foreign capital, American protection, oil money flowing again. But you have heard this before. Promises arrive faster than jobs. Announcements arrive faster than food. And transitions are always slower than pain. If you are outside Venezuela, you feel this too. At the gas pump, in inflation numbers, in the quiet anxiety about prices rising or falling. This is the human layer of energy politics. Ordinary lives balanced on global decisions. And this is why trust matters. Not for investors. For people. If you believe these issues matter, if you want clear analysis beyond headlines, this is the moment to subscribe. Because understanding power is the first step to surviving it. But this story does not stop at borders. Because Venezuela is not just a country, it is a signal to the world. When a major oil state reopens, the world pays attention. Venezuela is not isolated. It sits inside a tightly linked energy system. If US companies return, others react. OPEC recalculates. Russia watches closely. China adjusts its bets. Control over Venezuelan oil is not just commercial. It is geopolitical leverage. Washington signals that regime change can reopen markets. That message travels fast. To capitals, to boardrooms, to fragile states sitting on resources. But the ripple cuts both ways. flood the market, and prices soften. Soft prices strain producer states. Strained states become unstable. This is how energy shocks spread, not in explosions. In chains, Trump speaks of indefinite control, of selling seized crude, of shaping outcomes. History offers a warning. Foreign intervention can raise output. But rarely in a stable line, booms arrive, busts follow, and in a surplus world, even power has limits. Which brings us to the hardest question of all. What happens next? Because the future here does not have one path. It has three. So let me lay out the futures, not predictions, scenarios. First, the optimistic path. Legal reforms stick. Institutions stabilize. Oil companies commit long-term. Capital flows slowly but steadily. Production recovers, not overnight, but enough to rebuild infrastructure, enough to give Venezuela breathing room. This is the best case. Rare, but possible. Second, the middle path. Money trickles in. Projects start, then stall. Politics interfere. Uncertainty returns. Oil flows, but not enough. Growth limps forward. Disappointment replaces euphoria. This is the most likely outcome. History points here. Then the dark path. Political guarantees fade. Legal disputes explode. Investors retreat again. The oil stays underground. The system collapses back into distrust. Another lost decade begins. This is the lesson of energy and power. Resources do not create stability. Systems do. Oil can buy time. It cannot buy legitimacy. And that brings us to the final insight. Because this story is not really about Venezuela. It is about how power believes it can bend reality. And what happens when it cannot. Let me leave you with this thought. In Washington, power speaks in promises. In markets, reality answers in numbers. Trump offers protection, certainty, speed, but oil does not obey politics. It obeys systems, law, trust, time. Venezuela's tragedy was never a lack of resources. It was a failure of institutions. And no military operation can drill a well. No executive order can rebuild trust overnight. If Venezuela succeeds, it will not be because oil companies felt safe. It will be because rules held, because contracts endured, because power restrained itself. And if it fails, the lesson will echo far beyond Caracas. For every nation rich in resources, for every leader who believes control is the same as competence, if you want to keep understanding how power, markets, and people collide, subscribe, share this conversation, and stay with me.